This is the Public Broadcasting Service in Cleveland. You're watching your community television station. This is WVIZ-TV.
His fingers sprout leaves, his arms turn into branches. This ragged boy who had nothing to offer for Christmas changed himself into a living gift. With this magical image, Maurice Sendak sets the theme for simple gifts. A person gives nothing who does not give of himself. Simple Gifts brings together a distinguished group of writers, artists, and animators to treat the theme of gifts with 6 richly varied stories. The elegant imagery of the novelist Virginia Woolf, followed by the riotous vitality of the comic strip Toonerville Trolley. A page taken from the diary of an 11-year-old Teddy Roosevelt contrasts with a grim Christmas on a World War I battlefield.
Have you heard how the wars began? Benjamin Bowman. Have you heard how the wars began?
The variety is immense and the effect rich, but the subject remains simple. Gifts in all of its forms. Gifts with all of their meanings. Gifts offered, withheld, unexpected, promised, and unfulfilled. The playwright Moss Hart gives us our opening story. He recalls the bitter poverty of his childhood in New York. More than any stamp album, more than any chemistry set, more than any of the gifts that he saw in store windows or on a pushcart, he wanted the one gift that his father could not give him: love. A person gives nothing who does not give of himself. Perhaps it is the simplest gift of all, and the most difficult.
Christmas was out of the question. We were barely staying alive. On Christmas Eve, my father was very silent during the evening meal. Then he surprised and startled me by turning to me and saying, "Let's take a walk." He had never suggested such a thing before, and moreover, it was a very cold winter's night. I was even more surprised when he said, "Let's go down to 149th Street and Westchester Avenue." My heart leapt within me. That was the section where all the big stores were, where at Christmas time, open push carts full of toys stood packed end to end for blocks at a stretch. On other Christmas Eves, I had often gone there with my aunt. And from our tour of the carts, she had gathered what I wanted the most. My father had known of this, of course, and I joyously concluded that this walk could mean only one thing. He was going to buy me a Christmas present. On the walk down, I was beside myself with delight and an inner relief. It had been a bad year for me, that year of my aunt's going, and I wanted a Christmas present terribly. Not a present merely, but a symbol, a token of some sort. I needed some sign from my father or mother that they knew what I was going through and cared for me as much as my aunt and my grandfather did. I'm sure they were giving me what mute signs they could, but I did not see them. The idea that my father had managed a Christmas present for me, in spite of everything, filled me with a sudden peace and lightness of heart I had not known in months. We hurried on, our heads bent against the wind, to the cluster of lights ahead that was 149th Street and Westchester Avenue. Those lights seemed to me the brightest lights I had ever seen. Tugging at my father's coat, I started down the line of pushcarts. There were all kinds of things that I wanted, but since nothing had been said by my father about buying a present, I would merely pause before a pushcart to say, with as much control as I could muster, "Look at that chemistry set," or "There's a stamp album," or "Look at the printing press." Each time, my father would pause and ask the pushcart man the price. Then, without a word, we would move on to the next pushcart. Once or twice, he would pick a toy of some kind and look at it, and then at me, as if to suggest this might be something I might like. But I was 10 years old, and a good deal beyond just a toy. My heart was set on a chemistry set or a printing press. There they were on every pushcart we stopped at. But the price was always the same, and soon I looked up and saw we were nearing the end of the line. Only 2 or 3 more pushcarts remained. My father looked up too, and I heard him jingle some coins in his pocket. In a flash, I knew it all. He'd gotten together about 75 cents to buy me a Christmas present, and he hadn't dared say so in case there was nothing to be had for so small a sum. As I looked up at him, I saw a look of despair and disappointment in his eyes that brought me closer to him than I had ever been in my life. I wanted to throw my arms around him and say, "It doesn't matter. I understand. This is better than a chemistry set or a printing press. I love you." But instead, we stood shivering beside each other for a moment, then turned away from the last 2 pushcarts and started silently back home. I don't know why the words remained choked up within me. I didn't even take his hand on the way home, nor did he take mine. We were not on that basis. Nor did I ever tell him how close to him I felt that night. That for a little while, the concrete wall between father and son had crumbled away, and I knew that we were 2 lonely people struggling to reach each other. I came close to telling him many years later, but again the moment passed. Again it was Christmas, and I was on my way to visit him in Florida. My father was a bright and blooming 91 years of age now, and I arrived in Florida with my wife to spend Christmas and New Year's with him. On Christmas Eve, we sat in his living room, and while my wife chatted with his nurse and companion, I sat on a sofa across the room with my father, showing him the pictures of his 2 grandchildren. Suddenly, I felt his hand slip into mine. It was the first time in our lives that either of us had ever touched the other. No words were spoken, and I went right on turning the pages of the picture album, but my hand remained over his. A few years before, I might have withdrawn mine after a moment or 2, but now my hand remained. Nor did I tell him what I was thinking and feeling. The moment was enough. It had taken 40 years for the gulf that separated us to close.
do take your time shopping, don't you?
Now for a little nap. If I can ever get to my easy chair. Katrinka, I want you to get rid of all that mess in the living room. Peace and quiet.
George!
Of sorts.
What happened to Gerald?
I thought he was with you.
Me? Byron, where's your brother?
He was playing by the stairs, Ma.
Gerald! Oh, baby! Baby Gerald! Now stop that honking and look for your baby brother. Your child is lost and you sit there reading.
My baby is kidnapped!
Lord, the way some folks treat children.
Was, historians tell us, the most severe that has ever visited these islands. Birds froze in midair and fell like stones to the ground. At Norwich, a young countrywoman started to cross the road in her usual robust health and was seen by the onlookers to turn visibly to powder and be blown in a puff of dust over the roofs as the icy blast struck her at the street corner. The mortality among sheep and cattle was enormous. Corpses froze and could not be drawn from the sheets. The fields were full of shepherds, ploughmen, teams of horses, and little bird-scaring boys, all struck stark in the act of the moment. One with his hand to his nose, another with a bottle to his lips, a third with a stone raised to throw at the raven who sat as if stuffed upon the hedge within a yard of him. The severity of the frost was so extraordinary that a kind of petrifaction sometimes ensued, and it was commonly supposed that the great increase of rocks in some parts of Derbyshire was due to no eruption, for there was none, but of the solidification of unfortunate wayfarers who had been literally turned to stone where they stood. But while the country people suffered the extremity of want, and the trade of the country was at a standstill, London enjoyed a carnival of the utmost brilliancy. The new king seized the opportunity that his coronation had given him to curry favor with the citizens by directing that the river, which was frozen to a depth of 20 feet or more, for 6 or 7 miles on either side, be swept, decorated, and given all the semblance of a park or pleasure ground, with arbors, mazes, alleys, drinking booths, etc., at his expense. Railed off from the public only by a silken rope, the pleasure ground became at once the center of the most brilliant society. Nothing could exceed the brilliance and gaiety of the scene by day. But it was at night that the carnival was at its merriest. The moon and stars blazed in the hard fixity of diamonds, and to the fine music of the flute and the trumpet, the courtiers danced. Orlando, it is true, was none of those who tread lightly the Coranto and the La Volta. He was clumsy and a little absent-minded. He had indeed just brought his feet together about 6 in the evening of the 7th of January at the finish of some such quadrille or minuet when he beheld, coming from the Muscovite embassy, a figure which, whether boys or woman's, for the loose tunic and trousers of the Russian fashion served to disguise the sex, filled him with the highest curiosity. The person, whatever the name or sex, was about middle height, very slenderly fashioned, and dressed entirely in oyster-colored velvet, trimmed with some unfamiliar greenish-colored fur. But these details were obscured by the extraordinary seductiveness which issued from the whole person. Images, metaphors of the most extreme and extravagant, twined and twisted in his mind. He called her a melon, a pineapple, an olive tree, an emerald, and a fox in the snow, all in the space of 3 seconds. He did not know whether he had heard her, tasted her, seen her, or all 3 together. Finally, the unknown skater came to a standstill. She was not a hand's breadth away. She was a woman.
Auriez-vous la bonté de me passer le sel?
She asked.
Avec le plus grand plaisir, madame.
He replied, speaking French with a perfect accent. Name he found was Princess Marushka Stanislavska Dagmar Natasha Ilniana Romanovich. And she had come in the train of the Muscovite ambassador, who was her uncle perhaps, or perhaps her father, to attend the coronation. Orlando and Sasha, as he called her for short, and because it was the name of a white Russian fox he'd had as a boy, a creature soft as snow, but with teeth of steel, which bit him so savagely that his father had it killed, would talk of everything under the sun, of sights and travels, of Moor and pagan, of this man's beard and that woman's skin, of a face, of a feather. Nothing was too small for such converse. Nothing was too great. But in all she said, however open she seemed and voluptuous, there was something hidden on all she did. However daring, there was something concealed. So the green flame seems hidden in the emerald, or the sun imprisoned in a hill. The clearness was only outward. Within was a wandering flame. It came, it went. At last, the play was ended. All had grown dark. But it was such a night as this that they had waited for. It was on such a night as this that they had planned to fly. At midnight, they would meet at an inn near Blackfriars. Horses waited there. Everything was in readiness for their flight. Suddenly, he was struck in the face by a blow, soft, yet heavy, on the side of his cheek. So strung with expectation was he that he started and put his hand to his sword. The blow was repeated 12 times on forehead and cheek. The dry frost had lasted so long that it took him a minute to realize that these were raindrops falling. The blows were the blows of the rain. At first they fell slowly, deliberately, one by one. But soon the 6 drops became 60, then 600, then ran themselves together in a steady spout of water. It was as if the hard and consolidated sky poured itself forth in one profuse fountain. In the space of 5 minutes, Orlando was soaked to the skin. Some blind instinct, for he was past reasoning, must have driven him to take the river bank in the direction of the sea. For when the dawn broke, which it did with unusual suddenness, the sky turning a pale yellow, and the rain almost ceasing, he found himself on the banks of the Thames, off Wapping. Now a sight of the most extraordinary nature met his eyes. Dazed and astounded, Orlando could do nothing. Sometimes was the appalling race of waters as it hurled itself past him. At last, seeming to recollect himself, he clapped spurs to his horse and galloped hard along the river bank in the direction of the sea. Rounding a bend of the river, he came opposite that reach where not 2 days ago the ships of the ambassadors had seemed immovably frozen. Hastily, he made count of them all, the French, the Spanish, the Austrian, the Turk. All still floated. But the Russian ship was nowhere to be seen.
Christmas! Christmas! Hip, hip, hurrah! I was awake at 4, and we all 4 children went into Mama's and Papa's bed. I caught everybody in saying, Merry Christmas. We then opened our stockings. They were nice and bulky. I had 2 oranges and 5 kinds of candy in mine. I had a compass, thermometer, 12 photographs, a cardinal's cap, a pair of gloves and a beautiful cravat, a gourd for a water flask, a little ivory box with an amber cover, and an ivory chamois. Then Papa and Mama came in. We had prayers, and then we had breakfast. We then went into the parlor to our tables. The presents passed our utmost expectations. I had a beautiful hunt with all kinds of things in it. I received 2 lamps and an inkstand on the ancient Pompeian style, and a silver saber, slippers, a gold helmet and cannon, besides the ivory chamois. I have beautiful writing paper, a candlestick on the antique style, a mosaic 1,500 years old, and 3 books, 2 watch cases, 9 big photographs, and an ornament and a pair of studs. Then we went to St. Peter's to see the Pope.
Have you heard how the wars began? Benjamin Bowman here. Have you heard how the wars began? Cast us away. Have you heard how the wars began? When England fought to a man, and the proud tailor rode prancing away.
My dearest mother, just returned to billets after the most extraordinary Christmas in the trenches you could possibly imagine. On December the 23rd, we took over the trenches in the ordinary manner, relieving the grenadiers. And during the 24th, the usual firing took place. The sniping was pretty brisk. We stood to arms, as usual, at 6:30 on the 25th, and I noticed there was not much shooting. Even this gradually died down, and by 8 a.m. there was no shooting at all, except for a few shots on our left by the Border Regiment. At 8:30 a.m., I was looking out and I saw 4 Germans leave their trenches and come towards us. I told 2 of my men to go and meet them unarmed, as the Germans were unarmed, and to see that they did not pass the halfway line. We were 350 to 400 yards apart at this point. My fellows were not very keen, not knowing what was up. So I went out alone. They were 3 private soldiers and a stretcher-bearer, and their spokesman started off by saying that he thought it only right to come over and wish us a happy Christmas, and trusted us implicitly to keep the truce. I asked them what orders they had from their officers as to coming over to us, and they said none. They had just come over. They protested that they had no feeling of enmity towards us at all, but that everything lay with their authorities, and that being soldiers, they had to obey. They said that unless directly ordered, they were not going to shoot again until we did. We talked about the ghastly wounds made by rifle bullets, and we both agreed that neither of us used dum-dum bullets, and that the wounds are solely inflicted by the high-velocity bullet with a sharp nose at short range. We both agreed it would be far better if we used the old South African round-nose bullet, which makes a clean hole. We kept up this conversation for half an hour, at the end of which time they asked me to meet with them later in a larger group. During the afternoon, this extraordinary scene was enacted between the lines. A German NCO with the Iron Cross, gained, he told me, for conspicuous skill in sniping, started his fellows off singing some marching tune.
Tannenbaum, oh Tannenbaum, wie grün sind deine Blätter. Oh Tannenbaum, wie grün sind deine Blätter. Oh Tannenbaum, wie grün sind deine Blätter.
Oh, tidings to you, wherever you are. Good tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Josef, lieber Josef mein, hilf mir wiegen das Kinderlein. Will es wiegen und singen ein, nun schlaf in Ruhe, dein Äuglein zu.
Acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind. Should all acquaintance be forgot for the sake of old lang syne.
Heilige Nacht,
At 4:30 p.m., we agreed to keep in our respective trenches, and I told them that the truce was ended. They persisted, however, in saying that they were not going to fire. The same comic form of temporary truce continued on the 26th. And again at 4:30 p.m., I informed them that the truce was at an end. We sent them over some plum puddings, and they thanked us heartily for them and retired again. In the evening, we were relieved by the grenadiers.
The failure to recognize a gift when it is offered to us closes something within ourselves. Let us keep that something open. Let us make room at the inn. This is Colleen Dewhurst, thanking you for sharing this time with us and wishing you a Christmas of simple gifts, richly bestowed and warmly received.
Began Benjamin Bowman here. Have you heard how the wars began? Cast us away.